This episode is brought to you by Progressive, home of the Name Your Price tool. You say how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. It's easy to start a quote. Visit Progressive.com to get started. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, September 30th, 2004. The run-up to the 2004 election, incumbent George W. Bush versus Democratic challenger John Kerry, and it's the first presidential debate of that cycle. No surprise, it's fall of 2004. Nearly two-thirds of the 90-minute debate was about the war in Iraq, which by this point was already proving to be much more grinding than the Bush administration had anticipated and promised when they first invaded that country. And certainly the most memorable moment from that debate was the exchange in which John Kerry sought to criticize the nature of the invasion as hasty and cavalier and not coordinated. Kerry said, quote, "When we went in, there were three countries, Great Britain, Australia, and the United States. That is not a grand coalition. We can do better." To which George W. Bush responded, "Well, actually, you forgot Poland." And there it is. You forgot Poland. It is quite the line. It became a whole thing. It's a moment that we've been wanting to get to for a long time on this show. Shout out to listener Bianca and other listeners who have suggested this. We will not forget you about forgetting Poland. Let's do it. Here, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
Quite the catchphrase. I remember this moment, this election, which was one of the probably the first one that I was truly sort of locked in on. I remember, I think, watching it live and just realizing how absurd of a line that was. I want to talk about the substance behind that line and this larger question of kind of the international coalition that we had or didn't have going into the invasion of Iraq. But the line, I'm just curious your thoughts about why that line played, I think, pretty poorly. It's not just the line itself, but also Bush's delivery was just the classic Bush.
Yeah.
I've got a little sneering quip in my pocket, but I'm kind of don't know how to land it kind of line.
Felt like one of those lame comebacks where it's like, I don't know. I know I'm not, but what about you? Something like that. You know those
which
lame,
was like a Bush,
what?
sort of a Bush staple, that sort of comeback. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it also got to, he'd been kind of back on his heels that entire debate. First debates don't usually go well for the incumbent because they're not used to being challenged or pushed back on the same way that they had been as candidates 4 years earlier. And so he's already looking a little rough. And then Kerry is coming at him with a pretty assertive attack about, like, here you were calling this great coalition that you were putting together. You had Great Britain, you had Australia, you had no one else. And he's like, I had Poland too. And no shade to Poland.
Right.
Perfectly fine
and also
country.
factually correct, right?
Factually correct.
I mean, Poland was one of the four countries that actually sent troops. We'll get into that, but yes, I mean,
but in a way, like it's not only non-responsive, but it is proving Kerry's point. Is like, okay, Great Britain, Australia, and Poland. This is not a grand coalition to back this invasion of Iraq.
One quick aside, just your point about first debates is so true, and it's so consistent that incumbents in that first debate. I mean, it happened to Obama. I think Trump always felt this way, but like this, you see this vibe of like, wait, someone's like talking back to me. Where's this coming from? Like they just haven't had that for 4 years, right? Largely speaking. And so there was definitely an element of that.
Talking back challenging.
Yeah, exactly. And so there was definitely an element of that in here.
And they have a few other things on their plates, so they don't have necessarily like a week to set aside to do debate prep. Totally. Bush goes on to say, he says, well, actually, which, by the way, I just think we've learned to never start a phrase with well, actually anymore, but 2004 was a different time when those two words hadn't been canceled or called out as much. So all that's going on in terms of sort of the tone of the delivery, which I think was a big part of why this line stuck for folks. But then the substance of the delivery as well, as you were saying. I mean, just to lay out the facts, I mean, the United States entered this war with support, notoriously, famously from Great Britain, but Australia and Poland were the countries that had committed troops. I do want, before we talk about the kind of
way in which you forgot Poland became a meme before memes really existed. I do want to talk about the other substance of this idea of the coalition, because Bush goes on to say, and there are 30 nations involved, standing side by side with our American troops. And then, no surprise, he goes, and I honor their sacrifices, and I don't appreciate it when a candidate for president denigrates the contribution of those brave, brave soldiers. You know, he does that classic flip, retreat to patriotism.
It's so gaslighty.
Yeah. But that line about there are 30 nations involved, standing side by side with our American troops, this idea that there was a coalition, and the fact that the Bush administration was saying over and over, there are 30 nations lined up behind this effort. I mean, going back to day one, that was really contested and cynical and pretty porous line of argument.
Oh, it was deeply cynical. And I remember this from that time where, like, one of the nations was Eritrea. And it's like, again, Eritrea, perfectly fine country. But when we're talking about building this kind of consensus among nations, and that's what George W. Bush was trying to put forward. He was mirroring what his father had done, George H.W. Bush, in the first Gulf War, where there really had been this enormous coalition of nations. It's what the U.S. was used to from World War I and World War II, being part of these allied nations who were committed to a set of values, who were putting the full weight of their countries behind a joint effort against a commonly shared sense of threat and even evil. And that was something that George W. Bush was trying to claim, but there was nothing underneath that claim. It was, in fact, a very unpopular decision across the world. It had generated some of the biggest protests in world history prior to the invasion of Iraq. And here he is saying, no, there's a whole coalition here, a unity behind what I'm doing. And it was so cynical, and it was so just, I mean, yes, well, it wasn't entirely true. Not all of those 30 countries had signed up.
Yeah. Costa Rica.
There was something to it.
Right.
It just wasn't a genuine reflection of what the situation was.
This sort of sets the tone, I think, for the political sentiment all in this moment in which people are starting to really question, why are we in Iraq? What are we doing in this moment? Is this even necessary? And, you start to see that in the years that follow, a lot of this, fallout really starts to hit the fan and all of that. And so, trying to make this argument seem much more, not just legitimate, but like necessary, I think is a part of the downfall as well. I don't think Bush knew how to really sell this war or that debate.
And, people were, to Niki's point, asking those deep questions about this war from the very, very beginning. And I think it's important to remind people of that, But, yeah, and I mean, obviously, Bush goes on to win this election. And so, the sort of real reckoning that you're referring to, Kellie, about the nature of the war is still sort of contested. This coalition question, I mean, I just am fascinated by this because Bush is still referring to, he says a coalition of over 30 countries. If people remember, there was right at the beginning of the invasion in the spring of 2003, the Bush administration briefly was referring to this quote unquote coalition of the willing. And those were countries that ostensibly backed the effort to invade Iraq, not providing troops, right? And so there was they were eliding a little bit there, saying, we have this coalition, but it was really just a bunch of countries that it's really unclear how they got on the list. I mean, it looks like really the Bush administration just created this list, and it included countries like Afghanistan, Albania, Australia, Azerbaijan, Denmark, El Salvador, Eritrea, Slovakia. A number of countries on this list didn't even have armies. And I think, Kellie, as you pointed out, a number of countries on this list were like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Costa Rica famously, like after the list came out, said, please take our name off your list. And then, there's been reporting in the years since that they were like constantly revising this list and back editing this list for political purposes. It was seen as a sort of cynical and kind of slapdash move at the time. But this moment that we're talking about here in the debate, a year and a half later, Bush is still, that language is still there for him, right? Yeah. It's where he goes. We have this coalition. So it just shows you how much they just owned that justification for the war.
Yeah, and Kerry's like, Germany's not there.
Right.
France isn't there.
Yeah.
like this is not as robust as you think it is.
Yeah.
Not certainly among, the leading powers that be.
But I also think that it aligns with, Karl Rove had that line about we create our own reality. And this idea of the coalition of the willing, of the axis of evil, and the unwillingness to relinquish that language, even after it had become a punchline.
Yeah.
Was part of that creating your own reality, right? If you repeat it enough, it might not convince everyone that this is some grand coalition on the scale of World War II, but it muddies the waters. And we've seen this strategy much more in the years that followed. But at this moment, there really is just this sense that we're not letting it go. We're just going to keep saying it. And we don't care how many times you fact check us. Right. This is our line and we're sticking to it.
Yeah.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting the world together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
All right, back to Poland. So Bush says you forgot Poland. He is correct. I mean, Poland was, in the group of 4 that were supplying, legit numbers of troops. Poland was on that list. They'd provided about 2,000 troops, no small number. There were, Polish soldiers who were putting it on the line as part of this coalition. But why does it become such a meme in the days after the debate?
I mean, part of it is the early internet. So this is a pre-social media age, but you still have this sort of political culture that really does favor comedy and a kind of memification, pre-memes, as you were talking about earlier. So somebody immediately buys the website youforgotpoland.com, The Daily Show, which at the time is near the height of its powers, especially in an election year, runs whole segments on it. They start selling T-shirts. They start selling bumper stickers because it seems to encapsulate kind of, again, the ridiculousness of this idea that there is this strong coalition of the willing. And so you have all these people who don't like Bush, who found this moment absurd. It's picked up and repeated over and over again in this political culture. And so it kind of quickly becomes a catchphrase that not only is about making fun of Bush, but is about criticizing the war.
Yeah. And it doesn't help that there's like this sort of conspiracy that Bush's suit has like this bulge.
Well, that's the other little tidbit from this.
He's wearing like some sort of listening pack or that someone's feeding him the answers. If someone was feeding you the answers, you think they would feed you better answers.
Like Poland.
I had completely forgotten this, or maybe even this, didn't even know it at the time. But yeah, there was this whole thing where people were seeing some sort of bulge in the back of Bush's suit. And then, and not to go too far down this rabbit hole, people were like, what's going on here? People are feeding him answers. He is wearing a thing. And then Bush's tailor in the weeks after came out and was like, well, it was actually about how the suit was constructed and it was a pinch in the fabric and that's where it was bulging out. And then many years later, it was revealed that actually he was wearing a vest,
a bulletproof vest.
A bulletproof vest.
Bulletproof vest. Why?
Well, it was a pretty
war on terror, baby.
Tough time.
I mean, man.
But this poor tailor. Can you imagine the conversation with this tailor? Where it's like, we need you to go out there and say you screwed up this suit. And he's like, well, I guess so.
Actually, I don't want you to make a suit anymore.
But that tailor had to take one for the team, so to speak, and say it was my fault that I screwed up this suit and put this bulge in the back of his suit.
But to return, Jody, to your question about like why this catches on and becomes such a big joke, I mean, I think part of it too is that it's Poland.
Yeah.
So there's this long, long tradition in the United States of Polish jokes that make fun of Polish people, that make fun of Polish names. The episode of The Daily Show after this debate is basically all about making fun of Polish last names. And so I think that too kind of feeds into it, because there's also a ready-made joke culture about Poland that this falls into. Yeah.
And I mean, I'll give myself credit. I remember thinking even at the time, like, wait, this turned from making fun of Bush to ragging on Poland in some weird way. Like Poland didn't ask for this, and but yeah, I remember just feeling a little icky about the way that those jokes had kind of slipped into each other or whatever. Funny enough, Poland announces a couple weeks later that they are going to withdraw their troops. And I don't think it's because...
Take us out of it.
Yeah, I don't think it's because of this necessarily.
Poland
I think
was like, actually...
Yeah, right. Maybe they actually...
Our troops aren't there.
but it is worth noting, and that I think was most largely due to the criticism that Kerry was lodging, which is this war is not playing out in the way that we were told it would. So, yeah. All right, final tidbit. YouForgotPoland.com.
Does it still exist?
Did you just type it in?
The domain is available
No.
for the low price of $550.
What?
I'm just saying, if listeners
doing
want
a
to contribute,
Kickstarter,
we could do a special. We could buy. We could buy right now. YouForgotPoland.com. I mean, imagine the traffic. Especially after this episode. Yeah, imagine the merch. Yeah, I wonder if someone wearing a "You Forgot Poland" shirt right now is the equivalent of someone 20 years from now wearing a
Kafefi.
Oh, Kafefi or a Four Seasons landscaping shirt, which, I'm convinced is the funniest thing that's ever happened in politics, but maybe it will seem weird and whatever. But nevertheless, yeah, if you want to go buy it, folks, if you want to beat us to it before we can scare up.
And if you see one of those shirts out in the wild, you have to buy it.
Have to let us, yes.
Go to your
thrift
stores. We want to see it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will leave it there. Thank you again to Bianca and the others who have suggested we do this one. It's been on the list for a while. And thanks to you, Nicole Hemmer.
Thank you, Jody.
And thanks to you, Kellie Carter-Jackson.
My pleasure.
Secondly, when we went in, there were three countries, Great Britain, Australia, and the United States. That's not a grand coalition. We can do better. 30 seconds.
Well, actually, you forgot Poland. And now there's 30 nations involved, standing side by side with our American troops. And I honor their sacrifices, and I don't appreciate it when the candidate for president denigrates the contributions of these brave soldiers.
Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. What is Odoo? Well, Odoo is the only software your business will ever need. Featuring a suite of integrated business applications, Odoo connects your business operations together so you can get more done in less time. Odoo has apps for everything: CRM, accounting, sales, HR, inventory, marketing, manufacturing, you name it, Odoo's got it. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday.
Radiotopia.